Welcome back everybody. We're up at the beautiful Mount Seaview Resort and we're here with Jayco Newcastle's Owners Appreciation Weekend. And one thing I've added just for this weekend are some new wheels and tyres. It's a pretty exciting thing. I wanted to make sure we're a little bit more capable on this weekend because they offer off-roading tours and stuff like that all weekend. So what have I chosen? Well, these are the King Snatchers. They're in a 18x9 format, and most importantly for us, they're a positive 40 offset. What does that mean? Well, we'll go through that as part of the video. They're a machine finish, so they offer a little bit of a pop on the four-wheel drive rather than a standard black, and I think they suit it really well. But most importantly, we've also got the Maxxis Razr tyres in a 33-inch format, and they have made a really big difference to just how well it's planted on the road. I mentioned in the last video, I'm actually really happy with the four-wheel drive system that Ford offers in these next-gen ranges, and this just ups the ante a little bit more. We still need to fit a lift and all that sort of thing, but for this trip away, it has made a big difference. And while Michelle wasn't a huge fan of it, I got a huge bargain on these because I picked them up for $1,600. Brand new, it's probably about $3,500. So the owner before had these on his Everest, he traded it in and these were left over. So I got a bit of a steal there and they're going to help us out a lot for all our future adventures when we get out and about. So through this video, we're going to run through the wheels and tyres that we just fitted up to our next gen Ranger. But let's quickly touch on everything that happens here up at Mount Seaview through Jayco Newcastle because I think it's a really cool thing and it's a great initiative to be involved with. So come along as we show you how. So you can see here the range is a little bit dirty. We've been exploring all day up around the old Oxley Highway. Over to Ellenborough Falls. Down through Elands, Convoyne, and then back up the Oxley Highway to Mount Seaview. So the range is not looking terribly clean, but we'll show you what it looks like when it's all tissied up when I first fit the wheels. Now, for those that are looking to fit wheels up to a modern four-wheel drive, it's not all that easy. There's a lot of things to consider, and while I'm showing off these wheels, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to actually go through all the little things you need to look out for, the tips and tricks, and everything that goes into fitting an aftermarket rim and tyre package to pretty much any new four-wheel drive that's out there on the market today. But firstly, how nice is this place? Jayco Newcastle offers this to all their existing customers. You come out here for a free weekend. Last night we had to cook dinner. That was fine. We had a bit of a talk about the off-roading that was being offered today. And then tonight, they actually bring in the local Lions Club to cook up a feed for everyone here, and it's free of charge. And I think it's a great thing that they involve the community groups as well to give something back in everything that they do. It's something that's unique to Jayco Newcastle. So if you've got the opportunity to come out and enjoy one of these weekends away, it's fantastic. I say to everyone, just do it because you meet so many great people and it is a really, really nice family-orientated weekend away. So while the range is all dirty now, let's go back into the garage where it was all nice and clean. I'll run through fitting up these rims and all the little things you need to look out for if you're hunting around for some aftermarket rims to go onto your modern four-wheel drive. Because there's a few tech things you need to consider. We've got a few little bugs to iron out, but that'll be covered when it goes in for its next service. And more importantly, you want to make sure they're going to fit the vehicle that you're buying them for. Now, if you go to your local tyre shop, they're going to help you out with that. But if you're like me and you like hunting around for a bargain, you got to make sure you do your research and pick something that's going to work for you. So let's get into it. Now, why would you want to go and change your factory wheels and tyres? Well, for most of us, it's just to make the vehicle look a little bit better, but there's a fair few practical reasons on why you go down this path as well. And that's what I want to cover in this video. Well, to start with, the factory tyres that come on most vehicles, they're a compromise. They're made to be able to get their fuel efficient figures and do everything that the vehicle needs to do without making too much noise and being pretty basic and straightforward. So in the case of the Goodyears that are fitted to the Wildtraks, they are known as an all-terrain tyre, but they're not really an all-terrain tyre if you're starting to do some off-roading, go down some tracks and give them a bit of a hard time. Firstly, the sidewalls on these are particularly weak. So if you're going down tracks where you've got exposed rocks, tree roots or anything like that, it's very common to rip these open when you're going down some of those off-roading tracks. These are really made to be more of a gravel road tyre rather than an off-road tyre. So from that point, if you're doing some off-roading, you'll typically upgrade your tyres as one of the first steps. And the reason for that is that most of us will go a larger tyre. That will give us greater ground clearance, but we'll also go a light truck tyre, and that gives you a much stronger tyre, a lot better ply rating, stronger sidewalls, as well as typically a more aggressive tread, your side biters and all that sort of stuff that goes along with the different classes of tyres that you get out there. So in our case, we're going from an all-terrain tyre to what I would call an aggressive all-terrain tyre. But most importantly, I'm actually also increasing the size from the factory up to 33. And the 33 for me is a bit of a limit. And we'll also go through that as part of the video as to why I'm sticking with the 33s rather than going a larger 34 or 35 inch tyre. Now, of course, you could always upgrade your tyres using the factory rims. However, there are a few limitations. Firstly being the width. Now, the factory rim is only 7.5 inches wide. So that actually limits the width of the tyre that you can actually fit onto the factory rim. The second is obviously offset, which we'll get onto shortly. So the offset of these are positive 55, which means they sit in pretty close, and it's a clearance to the upper control arm that is the issue when you start increasing the width of the factory tyres. As you can see here, once you start fitting some larger tyres to the factory rims, the clearance gets extremely close. So the general consensus is that you upgrade to a maximum size of around 275/65 R18, which is around about a 32 inch tyre. Or some people will do a slightly narrower but taller tyre, being a 265/70 R18. That's just under a 33 inch, and the clearances are roughly the same. The first size is obviously just a tad wider, but these will generally work with your upper control arm clearances and everything like that. So that is why a lot of us change to an aftermarket rim, because that allows us to run a lesser offset. So it pushes the whole package out a little bit, and that, more importantly, allows us to increase the width to fit a larger tyre. But if you are upgrading your tyres, make sure you go an LT or light truck rated tyre. That'll make them a lot stronger, more durable, and they also have a better load rating as well. So if you're like me and you like hunting around Facebook for a bargain, there's a few little things you need to be aware of. It's not as simple as just buying any old wheel that's on Facebook Marketplace, even if it is a good deal. But I did my research to make sure that these would go on our Ranger in standard form with no dramas at all. So let's start going through that process on what you need to look out for so that you can do some bargain hunting of your own and you don't get caught out. Now, while some of this will apply generally across the board, I'm going to focus on the Ranger because I've done a lot of research into what will work, the offsets, the specs, and a whole heap of different combos. So we'll cover them to help anyone that might be looking to update the look of their particular Ranger, as well as all the things to look out for on these new modern vehicles. So let's get into swapping out the front wheel and I'll show you what it's all about. Now, the first thing is obviously the stud pattern, because you obviously can't go out and buy a wheel if it's not going to fit your particular vehicle. And I do see that from time to time on Facebook Marketplace, so people do get caught out. Now, in our case, we've got the standard stud pattern, which is 6x139.7, which is common across most four-wheel drives these days. There are a few differences out there, such as the MP300 Navara, which has a slightly smaller 6x114.3. And note that these weird arrangements are all based on inches. So they're inches converted to millimeters. And then when you start looking at wheels and tires, they go to inches again. So it does get confusing between imperial and metric, but just stay with us while we go through this. But for most people, it should make sense. The other big difference is obviously the Land Cruisers, where they run a 5-stud pattern, and then you have your Jeeps as well, which run a slightly different 5-stud pattern, and your Land Rovers, which have a different 5-stud pattern again. So stud pattern is certainly one thing you need to get your head around to make sure you're buying the right wheels from that point of view. Now while we're here, I'm just going to loosen off these wheel nuts before I jack the front of the Ranger up. I'm just using my breaker bar and a 19mm socket. I don't tend to use an impact because for me, I find it just as easy and nearly as quick to do it by hand, and you don't have to worry about causing any damage or anything like that. So let's get these loosened up. We'll jack the vehicle up, take the wheel off, and I'll go through a few other important considerations, particularly if you're putting wheels onto a standard vehicle and you don't want to fit flares or anything like that. Make sure you look up your vehicle's jacking points, because particularly with modern vehicles, you don't want to be jacking them up somewhere where the manufacturer doesn't want you to and damage something underneath. And always put a jack stand underneath. If you don't have a jack stand, shove a spare wheel under or something like that, just to keep everything all nice and safe. But again, I'm not using a rattle gun. I'm just going to take all these off by hand. Takes 2 seconds, to be honest. And now the next thing to consider is the centre bore size. Now all vehicles will have a different centre bore size. I find that Toyota in particular runs a really big centre. So that's one thing to consider. Mitsubishi on the other hand, they have a fairly small centre bore. And where you'll get stuck there is if you buy some other alloy wheels off a different vehicle manufacturer, go to try to bolt them onto your vehicle and that centre bore is too small. It's better to be a little bit larger than too small, because there is an aftermarket solution which are these hub-centric rings. So they simply go on and they allow you to adapt onto the standard hubs of your particular vehicle. So if we bring in our new King Snatch rims, they've got a larger internal diameter, but this hub-centric ring goes in just like that, and that reduces the inner bore size to the 93.1 that these next-gen Rangers run. I'm pretty sure Ford has used that same centre bore size for quite some time, but it's just a handy thing to know. And obviously these can be interchanged depending on what you're fitting your aftermarket rims onto. Now that takes me on to probably the most important factor in looking at an aftermarket wheel and fitting it up to your standard vehicle. And that is, of course, offset. So standard, these Rangers run a positive offset of 55. Now, even if you swap over to the Raptor rims, there's still a positive 55 offset. So what does that mean? And that's why I brought this over, because it's a little bit cleaner inside than the wheel that just came off that's been running up and down the highway for the last 26,000 kilometres. So the offset is very critical, and that relates to, if I spin this around, the centre of the wheel. And I'll put a diagram up here. So how it generally works is that you have a 0 offset. So that would be a neutral offset where the inside mounting face of this wheel is in the middle of the rim. Now it gets a little bit confusing because in a way the offsets work differently to how you read them in your mind. So what happens with a lot of modern IFS vehicles is that we then move that mounting face back towards the front of the wheel. And that is what you call a positive offset. So with a positive 55 offset, I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit here. The actual mounting hub is more towards the face over here. So in our case, we've gone from a positive 55 to a positive 40 offset. Now with these Rangers, you can go up to around about 30 or 35 as a positive offset before you start needing flares. So then we start getting into how everything sort of works. If you've got an older four-wheel drive, like an old Land Cruiser or a Patrol, you'll quite often go from the standard 0 offset to maybe a negative 22 or a negative 40. And when you actually look at that on some of the older style vehicles and rims and stuff like that, is that you end up with a really big lip on the front of the wheel. And that's a real challenge with these modern vehicles to get all of this looking and working well when the face of the wheel is so far towards the front. So how about we fit these wheels up and I'll run through the other offset combinations you have with flares and stuff like that to get them working on your next gen Ranger. This will apply to pretty much any vehicle, but it'll be specifically for the Ranger in some of the figures I'll talk about. But just note that the further you get to 0, the further that wheel's going to stick out. And now we'll get on to wheel nuts. But what I tend to do is actually put 2 in to centre the wheel on the hub so that we know we're sitting all nice, true and correct. So I simply just manually wind in 1 wheel nut. Then I'll put 1 on the opposite side. And that helps to centre and locate the wheel so it's all sitting nice and true. So what I mean by wheel nuts is that there are actually different thread sizes, pitches, and all that sort of thing. Now, most vehicles these days, particularly when you're dealing with four-wheel drives, are fairly standard. The Ranger is an M12 by 1.5 pitch, and again, that is pretty standard across the range. But what you need to pay particular attention to, particularly if you're fitting a standard factory rim onto a vehicle, is the nut that is used for that particular application. Now, the standard 4 Ranger rims, they've got a tapered wheel nut, which is like this. And that's pretty much what we're using in this instance, so we're pretty good there. But particularly when you're dealing with Toyota and stuff like that, they'll use a shank style nut. So this is just one I had lying around. It's actually got a separate washer. However, a fair few of them will have an integrated washer, so it can't get pulled off. But the idea of a shank nut is it's got this long shank that actually goes down through the hole of the wheel and seats the wheel onto the hub of the vehicle you're fitting it onto. The inside diameter of the hole, where your stud's coming through, it'll be oversized to allow for that shank nut to go in and actually seat and hold the wheel in place. If you don't have that in and you try to use a tapered nut, then there is a chance that the wheel will wobble around, get all out of center, and cause you all sorts of dramas such as bent and broken studs and all that sort of thing. So you need to make sure that you pay attention to your wheel nuts and you use the correct style and type that is suited to the wheel that you're putting on. Given this is an aftermarket wheel and it's just come off a Ford Everest, I know that what we're fitting up here should work on the next gen Ranger. And I actually got all the wheel nuts with the wheels when I went and picked them up. Now, this is strange to me, but put a few comments down below on what you think. All the wheel nuts are these slightly longer taper style, and they're security wheel nuts. So every single nut on the vehicle actually was a security nut that requires this special piece that actually locks in and allows you to tighten and take them off the vehicle. Now, I figure if I take this into a workshop, they're going to be pretty annoyed by having to use this adapter to get all the wheel nuts on. So I've actually gone and bought a set of wheel nuts, which are in the M12 by 1.5, similar size to this, so they all match up. And I'm just going to put one security lock nut on rather than doing all 6. So that's a little thing to look out for. And I'll be really curious on people's opinions on whether or not you should run all security wheel nuts. Don't run any at all these days, because one thing I did discover when I jacked the Ranger up and it was locked is that the alarm went off. So that's another thing to consider. Make sure you unlock your vehicle before you jack it up. To me, that is a really good security feature because it must have a little sensor in there. In this case, if someone wanted to remove these wheels, even though they're a pretty weak fitment, I don't doubt anyone would, the alarm actually goes off, which is really, really surprising. But I am curious about that. So I'm actually fitting one security lock nut. The rest are all just standard, just to make everyone's life easier. Now, the other thing to note, if you're using lock nuts with these little tools, make sure you put it in your vehicle, and when you take it in to get a service, wheel alignment, anything like that, let them know where it is. I'm going to put it in the center console, which is a pretty obvious place. In my VK and stuff like that, I've actually got it sitting in the ashtray. You don't get ashtrays in these new vehicles, so you've got to find another location. I'll actually probably just put this in a padded bag so it's not rolling around and making a noise, and life should be pretty straightforward. So just let me get this fitted on. I'll lower it down and I'll run through a lot of the other considerations in regards to all the offsets, all the little flare variations you can do, plus some of the tech stuff you need to be aware of when you're fitting aftermarket and in particular larger tyres to these modern vehicles. So if you see here, we're actually fairly flush, and I think it actually looks and works fairly well. And the legalities in regards to actually tyre protrusion isn't so much the sidewall, but it's more the tread. The tread needs to be inside. And the Rangers are a little bit deceiving because these standard plastics actually flare down. So in our case with this positive 40, noting that we've come out, I would say around about 10 mil from factory, given that we've got a wider wheel and that will obviously change how all those factors work. We could go out, I think, pretty comfortably to at least a positive 35, maybe a positive 30. Now, what are the options available if you want to go a more aggressive stance on your next gen Ranger? Well, I'm going to limit it to 2 different types of flares. You have the slimmer Ironman flares, and they say they can accommodate a track width increase of around about 25 mil. But I've seen a lot run around about a 25 positive offset with the Ironman flares. The EGR flares, well, that's what you start fitting if you're starting to get up towards a 0 offset. A lot of people will run a -1, which is just past 0. And the other popular offset is obviously a positive 18. So if we keep things simple, a positive 20 mil offset, it will actually sit the wheel out around about an inch or 20 mil further than what we've already got here. So as long as you're talking the same width rims, you can sort of work it out in your head how far your poke is going to come out. And obviously the further you come out, well then you definitely need to consider flares and stuff like that. Now in most states, and you need to check each state because the rules do vary a little bit, you can increase the track by around about 50 millimeters. So to keep things all nice and simple, you can actually go out to around about that -35 offset and keep everything all perfectly legal. Now there's also a high condition in a lot of states that is generally around 50 mil as well. And that 50 mil goes for both your suspension and the tyre. So if you're increasing the height with your tyre, then you need to consider that with your suspension lift as well. And that's just to keep everything on board and legal if you're not looking at engineering your vehicle. Obviously you can go down an engineered pathway, which will allow you to fit a more aggressive offset, some larger tyres and probably a bigger lift as well. But there's a whole process that goes with that. So given this is a primarily towing vehicle around town, we just want to have some additional off-road capability, which is in particular why I wanted to fit these better aftermarket tyres, just so that we don't have the risks involved with taking a factory tyre down a bush track, shredding it open, and being vulnerable from that point of view, given that we then need to use the spare. And that takes me on to another thing while I'm just here talking about the spare. Now with this upgrade we've done here, we've only got 4 wheels. So somewhere along the line, I do need to upgrade our spare tyre, whether or not it be a matching wheel and tyre, or just a tyre on the 18-inch rim that is the same size as this. Because on a lot of modern vehicles these days, if you do get a flat tyre, you need to put a spare on that is a matching size as far as the height, or else it screws everything up. So for now, we've got a slightly smaller spare, but I will upgrade that as soon as I possibly can. And while we're down this end of the world with the tub, the other important factor to note are load ratings, speed ratings, and everything like that. And where I come from here is if you're towing and getting really close to your GVM, or more importantly, you've actually got a GVM upgrade. Now, a lot of the GVM upgrades will actually note specific rims and tyres, a whole heap of different combos that you need to abide by, but most importantly, you need to make sure the wheels you're fitting up are load rated for your particular vehicle. And that applies to tyres as well. So these being an LT or a light truck tyre, they're obviously load rated to actually working pretty well with the rims. So the rims we've got here from King, these are the King Snatches, they've actually got a 1600 kilo load rating on them. Now, by surprise, these tyres here, which are a little bit different to a lot of the 33s I've had fitted to previous vehicles, these are a 275/70 R18. So they're a little bit thinner, but they've got a little bit more sidewall. These actually have the same 1600 kilo rating. So the combo actually works really, really well together, even though we'll never probably go close to that. But if we were to look at keeping this sort of combo on here and doing a GVM upgrade, these might be suitable for that. But just note that there's a lot of cheaper import rims that actually have a much lower load rating, all the way down to around about 1200 kilos. And 400 kilos per wheel is actually quite a significant factor that you want to make sure that everything's all nice and safe. Now we better button up these wheel nuts before we go for a drive and I get too distracted. The factory setting is 135 Newton meters, which is around about 100 foot-pounds of torque. My torque wrench here, it is Newton meters, so I've got that set to 135. And when you are tightening up wheel lugs on a wheel, you need to go through a certain tightening sequence. And on these 6 studs, it's usually opposite. So we'll do this one first, then we'll go down here, then we'll do this one, we'll go across, then we'll do this one and go up, something like that. You just want to make sure you're crisscrossing all the way around to get everything all nicey nice. The other thing I will do is I'll just quickly go around and check each one once I've got the sequence done, just to make sure I haven't missed anything and to make sure it's all set to that factory spec of 135 Newton meters. So we'll do that now and then I'll get on to a few of the tech things you need to consider. It's also important to check these after about 500 kilometers. So go for a bit of a drive, come back, check them to make sure that nothing was loose or not seated properly on the wheel hub so that you're nice and safe when you're driving down the road. And with it outside, it actually doesn't look too bad, does it? Just that little 1 inch increase in ground clearance has made a big difference, but I think it's actually the offset. And I don't know if I would want to go too much further because I've just gone for a quick drive to test it out and see how it goes. It's all pretty good. The back wheels, actually, you can sort of see the tyres sort of just ballooning out a little bit past the guard. So if you were another 10 mil out, I think you'd have a fair bit of poke, particularly on the rear. So now I want to get into a few of the little technical things you need to be aware of, because as I said at the start and in the thumbnail, it's not quite as easy as what it seems. So let's quickly touch on that, what you need to do and consider, and then hopefully we'll catch up with you when we're up at Mount Seaview next weekend. The first thing is a little tip and trick if you're using a torque wrench and you don't know. Always release the pressure off when you store it away. Don't store it with it wound up to 135 Newton meters. That'll actually destroy the calibration of the torque wrench. You always want to make sure it's all nice and loose when you store it away, and that'll keep it in good health. But what I really wanted to touch on was all the little tech bits and pieces that go into these modern vehicles, because most of them these days will have tyre pressure sensors. So there's a full tyre monitoring system that's all part of the next gen ranges and a few generations that came before that. For us, this is the first time dealing with it. So it's just a few little bits and pieces I'm adding into this video to help everyone out. So obviously if you're hunting around for a set of aftermarket wheels, they mightn't necessarily have the tyre pressure sensors in them. These actually came off an Everest and I was hoping they would have the tyre pressure sensors in them, but they never had them fitted. I'm assuming the owner just cancelled out the warning that came up on the dash. However, I did just go for a quick drive and it hasn't come up. So I'm curious if we start the vehicle and we're away from the factory rims, if it might have a little bit of a heart attack and pick that up. But what you really need to do if you're going to fit new rims onto a lot of these modern vehicles is to get the correct tyre pressure sensor fitted to the inside of the rim before the tyre goes on. Now Ford has a few different specifications with their tyre pressure sensors, so I will probably book it in with a dealer to get them fitted when it goes in for its service, noting that it's due in the next few thousand kilometres. If not, I could go down to my local tyre shop, but if you don't want the warnings coming up, you definitely want to make sure those tyre sensors are fitted. Now, I could take the sensors off our factory rims and get them fitted in here. Now, you would normally do that when you're going in and getting a brand new set of wheels and tyres put on, because I can do that at the tyre shop all in one go. In our case, I'll probably sell those rims and I figure they'll probably go on to a next gen Ranger or something with a tyre pressure monitoring system anyhow. So there's a value add in just leaving them in there and then getting some new ones fitted onto this. Now, they are self-learning, so it shouldn't be too much of a drama, but I'm figuring if I go through the Ford dealer, they can sort all that out for me. Now, the next thing while we're talking about Ford dealers is obviously we've now changed the rolling diameter of our wheels and tyres as opposed to the factory ones that these vehicles are all set up for. So you do need to get that recalibrated either through the dealer or with someone that's got the ForScan ability to be able to tap into these vehicles. And where I come from there is that even with our Pajero, we noticed when we went from the, I think they were 29 factory up to the 33s, it did change our speedo. And to be honest, it made it bang on with our GPS. So that was actually really good. So you need to be aware that because we've had an increase in tyre size here, it's going to adjust our speedo. And more importantly, it's actually going to adjust the calibration of the auto. And more importantly, it could throw out all the radar cruise control on these vehicles. Noting these are full of sensors and they need to be aware of what they're doing to calibrate and make sure you're going down the road properly. A few people have come across issues where they've increased the suspension height, also increased their tyre height, and the adaptive cruise control has started surging. So it's thrown the sensors out. So I think it's pretty good practice if you do make a change to the vehicle, you get that recalibrated through the settings so that it can adapt and reset everything to what it needs to be. These vehicles really need to know their proper speed when going down the road so that all that adaptive cruise control can work properly. And as I said before, it'll also make sure the auto stays nice and happy, and in a way, it'll recalibrate the speedo. I don't mind the speedo change because all modern vehicles seem to underread. So for me, I'm actually going to go out in the next few days and do a proper drive. I'll make sure there's no vibrations or any issues while we're going down the full highway at 100 kilometers an hour. I want to try out the adaptive cruise control to make sure we haven't got that surging issue, because we are going on a trip next week. So I want to make sure that we haven't got any issues before we connect the caravan up and do that trip up to Mount Seaview. So we actually made it up here to Mount Seaview and we didn't have too many issues at all. With a tyre monitoring system, I find if you're just driving around town, it doesn't pick it up. When we're taking our boys to soccer training, it's about a 15-minute drive out of town, and around about the 10-minute mark, it does pick up a tyre pressure sensor fault. So you need to cancel that and you just drive along. For a little while, it'll actually flash the little icon on the dash, which is pretty annoying. And after that, it just goes to a static illuminated icon. So from that point of view, we do need to get the tyre pressure sensors fitted to these rims just to alleviate that little issue. Now, from a speedo point of view, I've done a little bit of testing here and there, and we're actually slightly over. On the GPS speedos that I've tried, including Google Maps as well as our actual GPS speedometer app on the phone, we're at 100 kilometers an hour, we're about 2 to 3 kilometers over. So on our Pajero, we'll pretty much bang on the 100 kilometers on the GPS, whereas on this, we need to be a little bit careful because we're creeping over just that little bit. The one thing I did notice while we were towing the van up here is that the fuel consumption has gone up. It's sitting at around about 20 litres per 100, noting that we usually sit around 17. Travelling up here, I think last time we were sitting around about the 18 litre per 100 because there's a lot of hilly countryside that we need to go through to get up to Mount Seaview. So that has actually increased the consumption by about 2 litres per 100. But note that that's not entirely correct, because the next thing we need to do is adjust everything in the ECU to adjust for the higher diameter tyres. So what you find if you watch your normal trip computer and your odometer, to be honest, is it's going to be slightly out because the rolling diameter is different to what it thinks it's actually doing. So in our case, we're probably adding on, I would say, a litre per 100, maybe 1.5 litres per 100. But I think once the gearing and everything is all sorted out, again, through fine tuning the system by adding in those new diameters, it should be all okay. But there are a few little things that I've noticed. Now, I haven't actually tried out the adaptive cruise control, and if I do get an opportunity to do that before I close out this video, I'll add that in. But otherwise, it drove fine. I did find it maybe shifted down a few more gears, but the other thing I did also do was I really gave tow mode a good go on the way up here. I think for most part, it's actually really good. It's just when you're going down those steep inclines, it just pulls back way too many gears and it really revs out. So I'm still 50-50 on that. And again, I think once we massage everything, it'll be a-okay. But I'm actually pretty happy with this. We've had a lot of really positive comments, and even when it's dirty, it still looks pretty nice. But how beautiful is this place? It really is a nice piece of paradise. We actually both came up here for our school camps, and it's really nice to revisit how we saw it back in year 6 when we went through primary school, and try to reconnect with where we were back then and try to work out where everything is. Right now we're camping down on the river flats down there. You can see all the caravans lined up, and we're just about to go and have dinner down in the restaurant down the bottom here. So I've got to hurry up and go and do that. I'm going to quickly run the drone around, but so far I've been really happy. So I hope this video was really helpful. It helped everyone out there, gave a few tips and tricks and some advice on what you need to look at if you're looking to fit some aftermarket rims. The chunkiness of the rims I'm slowly getting used to, but I actually really like the machine finish, and I think it suits the Ranger really well. If anything, it looks heaps better when it's dirty like this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got a lot more content coming up. The next video will hopefully be putting a trolling motor on our kayak, because we're going back for 3 days. We're dropping off the van, doing a little bit of work, and then we're heading up to Yamba for a long weekend with Michelle's parents. So that's a bit of a halfway point. We went there last year and I want to test out that kayak. So I think the next video will be actually trolling that trolling motor on the back of the kayak, seeing how that goes. And then I've got to finish off our IKEA kitchen. Then we'll get back into our regular content, which might be a little bit of Jayco stuff, but more importantly, it'll be our things at home. So I need to finish off the Swan. I've got a few little list items I want to tick off there. We'll get rid of that and then start working on our budget camper trailer build, as well as the Journey in the background, the Ranger and everything like that. So I'm going to wrap this video up. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helps everyone out there in the community. I thank you all for watching, and as I always say, get out there, stay safe, have fun, and we'll catch you next time.